So, episode 3. Finally, things are getting more and more interesting. And here we are going to see the first ways to interact with our object and not only move around it. Indeed, here we will discover the three main actions as for the navigation, but this time for interaction, which are move, rotate, and scale. We will execute that on the cube itself, but we will see later on that you can execute those at different scales and levels. For example, moving or scaling points, edges, and faces, which will then let you alter the shape of your object. And again, like those three actions are the one you will always do to create geometry, or at least to modify it. In the end of the episode, we will also discover other objects that you can put in your scene, as well as selection tools and how to understand how Blender lets you select stuff, which will be helpful for the next episode. The next one is kind of the big one because it will really talk about altering the shape of the cube itself and creating geometry. But let's just start with move, rotate, and scale for now. First thing we want to do here is to tell Blender which object we want to modify or to play with. In this case, it's the cube, so we will just left click on the cube. This is the most basic selection tool ever, and in this case, the cube was already selected, as the orange outline shows. But maybe along the way, you clicked somewhere else, and you didn't have the cube selected anymore, or you had something else selected. So at least just one simple left click on the cube will make sure that we have this one selected. And later on in the course, we will anyway see other selection tools. So let's just have that for now. And now we want to move it. As I told you earlier, one way to do this kind of thing where you know the action you want to do, but you don't know where it is to go in those menus. So in this case, I know it's about my object and I want to transform it and I want to move it. But instead of clicking it, I will just check what the shortcut is. And apparently it's G. So let's just try that. As you can see, my cube is moving, but it's moving completely freely in the viewport. Though you can see that it's kind of following the window and the plane parallel to our viewpoint. If you want to accept the transform you're doing, you just have to press left click. If you want to undo it, you can expect that it's Ctrl Z and it's Ctrl Z. And also, if you didn't confirm yet and you're still moving your cube around, but you just feel like, no, actually I don't want to move it, then you have two options. You can press escape or you can press right click, and this will take your this will cancel your action, and the cube will just go back to its previous place. But in this case, no, we want to move the cube, but we don't want to move it as freely as it is moving right now. So let's say we want to move it on the z-axis, which is the vertical axis, as we saw earlier. A super cool feature of Blender is that you can, when you are in this mode of like moving things around, I'm not clicking on anything, I'm just moving the mouse and Blender is waiting for me to do the confirmation of the action, then you can just press on any axis you want and it will constrain the action on this axis. So in this case, I want to move only on the Z axis. So let's press Z on your keyboard. And as you can see, my cube movement is constrained on this axis. It also works for Y axis and X axis. And again, I can just confirm or cancel by right click. Even cooler than that, if you press G, you can press an old middle mouse button, and this will let you select by just the position of your mouse which axis you want to use. And as long as you don't release the button, then you can choose. And let's say I want to go on the y-axis, I just have to release the button, and then I cannot choose anymore, I'm just there. Also, one thing that you may have noticed already is that if you go to the edge of your viewport with your cursor, it will just jump back to the other side of the viewport, which means that you have virtually infinite possibility of moving an object by just moving. It will not stop at the edge of your viewport, which is cool in a way. Also, and this is more of a general rule, you can see that when you press G, down there under the viewport, you can see that the bottom line kind of changed. And it's now displaying whole kind of things which are actually all the shortcuts that are accessible while you are doing the action. Indeed, you can see that there is the confirm and cancel buttons that are represented with the left and right mouse button, as well as the different axes, X, Y, and Z. But now it's also telling us that you can do Shift and X to be on the X plane. What this means is that basically doing Shift X will move on every axis but the one that you pressed, in this case X. So if I do Shift Y, I will move on the X and Z axis but not the Y one. And if I do Shift Z, it will be X and Y and not the Z one. This is actually super useful. Also, there are a bunch of other settings, as you can see, like clear constraint, which is to free the cube again from any axis. And then it's just snapping things, and also the rotate and resize options, because in fact you're not just moving, like the action is not just moving but transforming. So let's just remember those. It's R and S, and let's cancel everything. And so if we try to press R now, we can see that we can rotate the cube. Woohoo! And same here, you can use one of the axes to actually rotate around this axis. You can do that with planes, which is actually the same as just using one specific axis. Super easy. And if you press R again, then you enter some kind of how would I call that? Like a ultimate rotating tool where you're not limited by any axis anymore. You just rotate anywhere you want, whereas the normal rotate just rotates based on the axis from which you're looking. Like if you draw a line between the center of the object and your eye, then you get your rotation axis. So double R lets you rotate everywhere you want. And the scale tool was S, which kind of makes sense. S for scale, R for rotate, and G for grab. So S will just let you scale. It works with axis, and it works with like opposite of just one axis. Simple as hell. And yeah, if you just know how to use one, you know how to use all of them. Also, this thing of like the shortcuts are written down there is super interesting, I think, because this is something, it's a mechanic that you will see in a lot of tools that we will be using. So as you're discovering Blender, I encourage you to just keep an eye down there to always know how to maybe use more of the feature or the tool. So now you know the shortcuts for the main actions to modify your object, but I like to use it in a kind of different way. When I don't use the shortcuts, I like to use what is called the object gizmo. You already know this gizmo, but the object gizmo is another one that you can find in the gizmo menu, basically up there, upright in the viewport. And we go to object gizmos, and you can tick one of these, for example move, and this will display 3 arrows that are corresponding to the axis, obviously, and let you, by just click and drag it will let you move along this axis, and the three square there are basically the shift plus axis that we discovered earlier. It let you move on the two other axes that the one selected by the color basically. And I really prefer to use object gizmos because if you're working on the cube, your cursor is most likely to be around the cube. And so the gizmo is also likely to be around there. So it's not much of an efficiency loss. It's actually better because if you have to press G, you probably have to look down and look at your keyboard before you actually press G. So I like to just use these because I can do super quick constraint movement as well as freely move my object if I press on the cube. And also you can have access to the other ones, and you can combine the different actions together. I don't really like the rotate one because to me it takes a lot of space, and if you want to click anywhere there, you get to this rotation mode. So to me the best combo is actually move and scale because it doesn't take too much space but lets you do a lot of things in just a simple gizmo. But here I encourage you to make the own decision. You just have to use it. Some people hate this tool, but which I can understand as well. But I just feel like in terms of efficiency, it makes sense. And it's easier to just like grab the gizmo and say, I want this to be there, instead of just looking down your keyboard, pressing G, and then choosing which axis is. I don't know. It's again, you have to make a decision there. But personally, I like to go with the gizmo. So, as in the next episode, we will be altering the mesh of our object. Finally, I want to finish this one by showing you that there are other base objects than the cube, and then we will see the selection things. So indeed, the cube is rarely your endpoint, and usually it's just a base to actually build something based on. And usually, indeed, the cube is rarely your endpoint, and most of the time it's just a base for you to build something out of it. And also sometimes starting off a cube is completely pointless. So let's move it there and let's add other objects. We could go to the add menu up there, but you know that we don't want to do that. And instead we want to use the shortcut, Shift A. So Shift A is quite important, or at least it's good to know it, because it lets you add some object on the fly basically. And you can add a lot of different stuff, from curves to meshes, armature, images, lights, cameras, like a lot of different stuff. But we want to go for a mesh. So let's just go in the submenu meshes. And here you can add a variety of different stuff. Most of the time I start off a plane, so let's just add one, and let's move it there and add something else like I don't know, cone. Or you can also add a monkey, which is called Suzanne, and it's kind of the mascot of Blender. You can find it on a lot of different things. Also, you can duplicate your object by pressing Shift D. And this is not just duplicate, the action is called duplicate and move. So basically, once you duplicated your object, they are here and you can use exactly the same tools as with the normal move. So for example, constraining it to an axis, in this case, Y. Also, if you duplicate and you just cancel the action by pressing right click or escape, you don't cancel the duplicate action, you cancel the move action. And this is quite important because although it seems like we just have the base object, we are actually having double objects, sorry. And this is something you will have to be careful of, especially later when we will see other function that work kind of in the same way. And yeah, let's just It's just important for you to know it at this point. It's getting a bit messy here and we don't need that many objects, so let's just remove this row, for example. And to do that, you can press X. So X will ask you if you want to actually delete the object, and yes, we do. But actually, we want to do it in another way as well, which is using delete. And when you use delete, it doesn't ask you, it just remove it. So the thing is, I don't really use delete because it's so far from where my left hand is. I'm right-handed, so I'm moving the mouse with the right hand, and with the left one, I don't want to cross the keyboard to get there. So usually I just use X and coordinate with a fast click to just delete things. But anyway, now that we have some object in the scene, let's see some quick selection tools and then move on to the really interesting stuff. As we saw, before you perform any action in Blender, you have to specify on which object or zone you actually want to do this action. And that's why I want to show you some selection things. We already saw the left click to select. As you can see, it just unselect and select something else when I click on another object. And so if you want to add up to the selection, you have to press Shift and click, left click. If you want to remove an object from the selection though, it becomes a bit more tricky. And indeed in Blender there is a concept by which one object at a time in the scene can be set as active. This means that he will be the one under the spotlight in the property panels, for example. So here you can see that it's the cone that is active. You can see it because of its outline. Like all the other ones have like a darker orange, and this one is lighter orange. And you can see that in the property panel, the properties of the object are based on the cone and not on the other ones. And this is why you have this concept of active. It lets you tweak one object at a time, where it would get a bit more complicated if you have multiple objects, especially if you have objects of different kinds, like a light and a mesh. What would you display in the property panel? But so to remove an object from the selection, you have to make it active and then to shift click on it to remove it. But it's easy when the object is already active, but if it's not the one that is active that you want to remove, you have to first shift click on it to make it active, and then shift click again to remove it from the selection. And you can see that its origin point is still orange, and there is no active object here, so the property panel will still use the latest one, sorry, to be active to use in the property panel. So if you shift click on another one, then it gets active, the other one completely disappeared from the selection, and you have the property panels here. To unselect everything, you can just click somewhere, like anywhere in the viewport, but not on an object, and this will cancel the selection. Also, if you want to select multiple objects, another way to do it is to actually drag and draw a rectangle in which all the objects that are touching it will be selected. It's kind of a selection box basically. If you do Shift and selection box, you will add new object, and if you do Control and drag left click, you will remove object from the selection, which can be also a good way, thanks to which you don't have to do this all active object thing to remove an object from the selection. If you press W, you will see up there that the selection mode is changing. So for example, this one, you have to paint the selection, kind of. If you press W again, you get some kind of lasso. And W again will have like a click and move action. And if you press once more W, you just go back to the selection box. And honestly, I just have this one all the time activated. I don't like the other ones particularly because this one select even if you just touch a bit, whereas the circle one, for example, you have to touch the center point of the object, and just going on the edge of the object won't be enough. So yeah, I just prefer to go with the rectangle selection box. But again, this is kind of my way to do it. But if you want to do with another one, it's your call, really. Also, pressing A will select everything in your scene, even as you can see the camera and the light. But if you press in the void or Alt A, you will not have all of these selected anymore. We can also talk about hiding objects. For example, those three. You just have to press H, and this will hide the object. You can see in the outliner that their name is dimmed, and the eye next to it is kind of closed. And as for selecting everything and deselecting everything, you can press Alt H to show them again. Usually Alt plus something is to basically do the opposite of the action. So yeah, if I hide something with H, I do Alt H to show it. Conclusion on that, you just saw the most primitive actions you can do with the most primitive objects. You learned how to move, rotate, and scale an object, which will be used in the next episode quite heavily actually to modify meshes. And you also learned some tips about the gizmo and how it can make you more efficient in the 3D view. And finally, you learned about how to add new objects and how to select, delete, and hide them. All of this is conceptually super easy, but at least here you got to know more about how to use those actions, like for example with the shortcuts. And yeah, since we will use them a lot and basically all the time, it's better that you get very familiar with them. But at least you know that conceptually it's not difficult and it's quite easy to wrap your mind around that. So let's just go for the next episode and discover how to alter the shape of our meshes.